So you saw the sign, death penalty, right or wrong? What are your thoughts on that? Huh?
So I do not see how we can have a single answer which can do justice to all possible cases. What I'm trying to say is it has to be something which is very case specific. It's not something that I would want to be the default or rush towards. It's not something that we would want to be comfortable with. But it's also possible to think of cases where to set a precedent it just becomes justified, because in some cases it's important to say every time we make a decision we are setting a precedent for the future, right? And if somebody does something seriously outrageous, outlandish, then
Example in mind? Like a school shooting, someone goes
school
in,
shooting
kills
is one, yes.
21
School shooting
kids.
is one. It depends. Everywhere we have similar cases which are just horrendous. They are eye-opening, right? The stuff which we never imagined was realistically possible. So for those cases, I fail to see if it's practically possible to select a single approach and apply it to everything. That it's either a yes or a no, right? So that's where it seems to go from my point. I would want to avoid it, but then after a certain stage, just becomes the right thing to do, to set the precedent. We want to have a deterrent which is strong enough in the worst case possible, let's say.
Yeah. So it sounds like you would say that the death penalty is right in some cases, wrong in other cases, and the cases in which it's right might be extremely outrageous offenses.
Exactly.
And you would want some kind of serious deterrent to prevent that from happening again in the future.
Exactly. It is serious, and it is only justified for something equally serious.
Gotcha.
Right?
Yeah, I'm curious, man. You personally, what would make putting someone to death for a not serious crime wrong? Why do you think that's wrong? Someone, by the way, I completely agree. You know, I think that there are cases where people should absolutely be put to death for what they've done. But then there are other cases, somebody robs a liquor store, they shouldn't be put to death for that, right?
No.
Why do you think that would be wrong?
It's extreme. The punishment should always be, the response should always be proportional to the offense or action, right? So this is disproportionate to the crime or infringement that was committed, right? Yes, if for example on a first robbery you can have let's say a warning or something like that. I'm not saying on some repeated offenses you may possibly make the punishment more severe thing. That's what I would think of. Obviously I'm not qualified technically speaking, just as a something that I'm comfortable more from comfort and my ability to think rather than from any informed background.
That's totally understandable.
So it has to be proportional to the infringement done.
Yeah,
And
I agree.
we also, there's a very, the main goal of the justice system is to impart justice implicitly where there is a way to come back from the wrong that was done. We would want people to get a reason and be motivated. We want to give them a reason to come back from where they have gone. If at all, they have still not gone too much beyond, as we said. We would want them to come back and we want to give them a reason, the resources, the chance to come back. So as long as the infringement does not basically cross a line, we would want to not set up opposite example where people just tend to give up on the judicial system or whatever, right? We don't want to give a message that the system is only there to punish you. Punishment is also a part of it, but it's also a part of cleansing the society where it is possible, right? That's what we want is to cleanse. What we may be forced to do is punish, right? What we want is to purge, basically.
Makes sense, man. So I'd be curious to know, I know you mentioned you were Sikh before we got on camera. I'd be curious to know how your religious perspective influences the way you'd answer this question personally. The show that we do, it's called Theology in Public. Theology, as you probably know, refers to religious beliefs or beliefs about God. And the reason why it's called that is because we like to explore how a lot of these big worldview questions oftentimes come back to people's religious beliefs. So as a Christian, for example, the Bible says that whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed, because man is created in the image of God. And so as a Christian, I would point to the scriptures and say death penalty would be justified in cases of intentional murder, right? I think my conscience would also point into that direction, even if I didn't have the scripture saying that. My religious beliefs will sometimes inform my opinion on specific moral issues like this, because the scriptures that I believe in will teach to something like the death penalty directly. But I think there's probably an even deeper way in which our religious beliefs impact the way we think about morality. Because if we were to ask, why is anything right or wrong? Why is anything morally good or bad? I think we're going to end up in theological territory pretty quickly. I'd be curious to know, maybe just briefly before we wrap up our conversation here, how you would answer that question personally. If I were to ask you, why is murder wrong? Why is putting someone to death for stealing from a gas station wrong? Why is anything wrong to begin with? How would you answer that question personally? And you can take your time to think about it. I know it's kind of a deep question.
That's a very good question, because at the end of the day, it's human beings making all calls.
Oh, okay.
There is nothing objective written somewhere that something is right or wrong.
You don't think so?
How can you decide something is objective? If religion, scripture, if they were objective, then everybody would be able to agree on them.
Yeah, maybe we're using terms differently here. By objective, all I mean is that it's not dependent on people's opinions.
And that is not possible, because every decision is taken by people. Every interpretation is based on a person's knowledge, upbringing, context, their ability to understand. I may not have the entire context. I may not have all the information. From my experience, I may not have the ability to understand all aspects of it. I may have my internal biases, whether I like it or not. So every decision that a human being is taking, by definition, can never be complete. It cannot be objective.
Well, I completely agree with you, by the way. I completely agree with you. We can't get outside of our own subjective experience, right?
Yes.
That said, when I say that, like this rock in front of us exists, what I mean is that the existence of the rock isn't just a matter of opinion.
Yes.
It's my opinion that it exists, but my opinion is that it exists no matter what people think.
Yes.
Right? And if I don't believe it exists, if you don't believe it exists, that doesn't change the fact that it does, right?
Yes.
The rock is still there. It doesn't care if we believe in it or not.
Yes.
And similarly, you can tell me what you think of this. It seems like that's the way we perceive morality oftentimes. When someone cuts off a bunch of people's heads, like you were talking about, and sells them for a price, we look at that and we say, that is wrong, and it's wrong regardless of what people think. It doesn't matter if the society at the time thought that was okay. It doesn't matter if the entire world thought that was okay. It's still wrong. It's wrong regardless of what people think. That's at least the way, that's what my moral senses tell me. I don't know if yours would tell you the same thing or not. But
now, and I do think I understand where you're going, and I can try to answer that.
Of course.
I'm not claiming I have an answer, but because I heard the question and made the sense of your question, I think an objective way of judging it, will it be fair if somebody did the same thing back to me? Somebody does it back to me and it's wrong, then it's wrong when I do it to the other party. I'll say injustice to anyone is a threat to justice everywhere in the system, right? So the rules have to be based on the infringement, not based on who did it. As long as we can keep the same rules based on who did it, then we are doing something which is very close to objectively correct and justifiable.
Okay. Now, when you use that word, that's a very interesting word. And by the way, I completely agree. I think that's a very useful guiding moral principle. It's actually one that Jesus was very famous for teaching, that do to others what you would have them do to you, right?
Exactly.
The deeper question, to me, it just seems to kick the can down the road a little bit, because then you're going to ask, well, why is it wrong to do things to other people that you wouldn't want them to do to you, right?
No.
I agree that it's wrong, but why is it wrong, you think?
I would disagree with that question.
Would you mind scooting this way just a little bit, just for the camera? Here you go.
Why is that wrong? It is by definition wrong, because if it is wrong to do it if I do not want it to be done to me and I do it to someone else, at that point it becomes wrong.
I agree. Why can't we ask why? What if somebody says that I think it's good to hurt other people? It's good to do
beneficial. That's not right. That's beneficial. That's a different way of looking at it. That yes, somebody may be able to justify based on profits. They may be able to justify in their own way. It's something like this. People will it's a very diverse world. I can literally choose to do whatever I want, and I'll be able to find some examples somewhere in order to be able to justify my behavior. Something happened somewhere, so I did it. I did wrong, but it was done to me.
Right.
It's a very diverse world. People are doing all kinds of things. You can literally do whatever you want and be able to give an excuse to justify that and just shrug off saying it was
Definitely.
me. You can do. Then what do people do if we have the option to do whatever we want? Then what do? We do how much, let's say, mentally and intellectually and emotionally evolved. We decide based on that. All of us have pretty much nearly similar information. We have a similar stimulus in the real world. There are good days, there are bad days, there are similar experiences. But at some level, as you say, we have intellectual, and this is very conscious decision, deliberate decision. This is not something which can happen by itself. It has to be a conscious effort.
Yep.
We have to make a decision when things force us to be impulsive or become subjective. It's actually then that the real test comes. We have to still be objective where it becomes very hard. That's where the real test is, right? So I hope I answered your question in that sense. So in that sense, basically, I can say that things can be morally right or wrong, and I would basically say we should not do it. I hope I answered your question.
It's interesting, man. So if I'm understanding you correctly, you would say that it is, so if I think that it's totally fine to cut off people's heads and sell their heads for a price, and you think it's wrong, is your opinion no more correct than mine? It feels like your opinion's correct and mine's incorrect.
The thing is, once again, correct becomes objective.
Exactly.
Let's look at it this way.
It is your opinion that it's wrong, but is your opinion correct and mine's incorrect? If I have an opinion that 2 + 2 = 7, obviously that's an incorrect opinion. 2 + 2 doesn't equal 7.
Perfect. So now we get back to another point. So how objective can we get? How can we decide whether something is right or wrong?
So that's an interesting question too. It's actually a little bit different than the one that I'm getting at here. I'm not asking how do we know right from wrong. I think a lot of us we come to understand what's right and wrong through our moral experience, right? We all have moral senses. Some people say they have consciences, right?
Yes.
But what I'm asking is, why is it right or wrong? Not how do we know it's wrong, but why is it wrong? I'm not asking, for example, how do we know there's a rock here?
I see.
I'm asking, why is the rock there? Why is murder wrong? Why is rape wrong? Why is child abuse wrong? I completely agree. You're doing things to others that you wouldn't want them to do to you. But why is it wrong to do things to others that we wouldn't want them to do to us? I think it is. I think if someone has a different opinion, they're incorrect. But why?
See, that once again, because so now it becomes, how do you define, is correctness objective? If it is objective, then it has to be objectively correct or objectively wrong. Correct? Correctness is objective. And now how do we decide if correctness is objective or not? That is implicitly written in the causality of the universe. If we look back and see what were the results of certain actions over a period of time, it answered itself whether it was right or wrong. Because think of it this way, if the universe is causal, something that is wrong is not sustainable. If wrong keeps winning, the universe has to end. Do you understand what I'm saying? A causal universe cannot sustain by definition if wrong keeps winning.
So we essentially
right
know
has
right
to
and
win.
wrong from the outcomes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right has to win, otherwise the universe has
Gotcha.
if wrong keeps winning.
So
There is
that's
a
a
way
good
that's
answer, man.
objective. There is an objective right and wrong, correct?
Well, so that is, I think, a possible answer to the question of how do we know what's right and wrong, right? By looking at how the history of the universe has transpired.
Right or wrong.
But I don't know if that's why something's right or wrong. If I'm asking why is murder wrong, we can say, well, we know murder's wrong because of the way that the history of the universe has unfolded up to this point and what murder does to societies when it's accepted and things like that. But that's not an answer to why is murder wrong. And this is where it gets into theological territory, because if we're going to accept what our moral senses tell us, and a lot of people, even though they feel like genocide and racism and rape are wrong no matter what people think, even though that's the way they feel, they have to deny that's the case because they don't have a way of making sense how that could be the case, right? But if we're going to accept what our moral senses tell us, that there are some things that are right or wrong regardless of what people think, if we're going to accept that, the explanation is going to become probably something religious. But before I share that, what did you want to add in? What did you want to say?
Now I want to ask you a counter question.
Sure.
In order to be able to meet at a point. So when you said why is it right or wrong, what kind of things will you consider as an answer to that why, if we can get that? What will be your definition of a possible answer? Maybe not the accepted or right answer, possible answer which you think if an answer of this type comes, we can agree that it answers the why. Are there any possible answers? Because I think you will very clearly see that it gets into definitions, and we end up in the same point, that objective correctness, that's as close as we can get. If you try to give me an example, we can try to meet at that point. What would be an acceptable answer, if possible, from your side?
That's a great question, man. I'll share what I think is the best explanation, and then you can tell me what you think of it. Obviously, lots of explanations for objective morality have been offered over the years, but I'll tell you the one I think is the best, at least. Whenever you ask, why is something wrong? If we ask, why is murder wrong, and someone says, what you were saying, and I agree, you're doing something to someone else you wouldn't want them to do to you, that just kicks the can down the road, and then you're going to ask, why is it wrong to do that, right? And why is it wrong to do that, and so on and so forth. When we think about morality, it seems to offer us a pretty amazing insight into the nature of reality itself. What I mean by that is, if we're going to accept that some things are wrong, no matter what people think, we're implying that there's some kind of reference point out there, right? There's some kind of standard for right and wrong that exists outside of our minds. It's not just a matter of opinion, right? And the interesting thing is, when we think about moral values, things like love and justice and mercy and patience and loyalty and things like that, moral values seem like they can only exist in a person. Which means that whatever that standard is for moral values out there has to be a personal being of some kind, obviously a transcendent person of some kind, not just like any ordinary human being. If we're going to say this person's character is the standard for moral values, that what's good is whatever this thing is, right? And similarly, when we think about moral laws, things we're required to do or forbidden to do, I think I'm required to act justly, I'm forbidden to cut off people's heads, right? Moral laws also make the most sense if, again, there's some kind of person in authority that's requiring us to act certain ways and forbidding us to act other ways. In other words, moral laws seem to make the most sense if there's a moral lawgiver. And those are two big parts of what many people would consider God to be, right? That's why this gets religious pretty quickly.
That's what I said, the universe.
Right. Well,
you can call it God, you can call it whatever you want. The main thing is whatever we sow is going to come back.
The interesting thing is, if I'm understanding correctly, you would say that the universe isn't personal, right? It's not a personal being like you and me. So what you shared is a possible explanation. I personally don't think it's the best explanation, because it's hard to see how an impersonal thing like the universe could be the standard for moral values, since moral values like love can only exist in a personal being, right? What are your thoughts on that?
Morality cannot be subjective.
I don't think it's subjective either.
So it's not personal. The whole goal of it is that it has to be objective.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So by personal, I don't mean that it's just a personal opinion that love is good. What I mean is that since love can only exist in a personal being like you and me, whatever the standard is for moral values, whatever our reference point is for moral values, it has to be a personal being of some kind, because moral values can only exist in personal beings. Do you see what I'm saying?
I understand your point, but I think of it differently. I'm not saying I'm...
That's okay.
I think in my definition, the very moment that it becomes anyway related to what a person, as we said, can comprehend or whatever, it ceases to be objective.
Interesting.
By definition, I am keeping it outside of the purview of any single individual, definitely. And even basically, it's less about interpretation, more about universal laws, what's right, what's wrong, kind of a thing. We, in one way, see, as long as I do, we all know what's right, we all know what's wrong. We only do when we fear what's wrong. If there is no fear, a lot of people will still do. Right. And that fear, right, we will be able to justify doing the wrong thing.
Unfortunately.
We will know we are wrong, we are wrong, but we'll still do it. So that trigger to not do the wrong can only come when I know deep inside that there is absolutely nothing in anybody's control to help me out if I do something wrong. The result is written in stone.
Gotcha.
Period. It's not something that I control. It's not nobody is going to come and punish me. On the other hand, they cannot even save me even if they wanted, because I have done something whose result is written in stone. So it has to be objective at that level, where we understand that it's not even the judicial system or me or my friends or anyone who is coming. The results of my actions are defined by the actions themselves. And that's what I meant by the causal universe. Think of it this way.
Thank you so much for sharing this. I really appreciate you trying to explain this here.
Too theological. It depends on how we define God, right? I will not get too much into God, but in a way, we say God is everywhere, omnipresent, etc. So in
each of us, right?
Yes.
We're all part, or He's in us. We're all part of
Exactly.
God, right? Yeah.
So whenever I am doing something, whether any individual is seeing me or not, and even if they are on my side, think of it this way: if I do something wrong, and we are very good friends, and you see me doing something wrong, till now we have been the best of friends in life. But the moment you see me doing that, you can be my friend, but deep inside you cannot trust this person.
Right.
In that sense, now God is omnipresent and God knows this fellow is not somebody. And when the time comes, you will not be able to trust me. You can think of me as much as you want as your friend, correct? But your decision will speak for itself that you lost your faith in me that day when I did that action. That is what we mean by when we say it.
Gotcha.
So this is beyond what an individual can control, right? We observe and there is a universe around me. People are observing me. If I cut trees, it's going to have an effect irrespective of whether somebody chooses to punish me or not.
So if I'm understanding you, then you would say that something's wrong when it leads to negative consequences.
Yes.
Something's right when it leads to positive consequences.
In a way, yes.
Interesting. Yes. So I would definitely agree that there are some actions that do lead to negative consequences. I think the example you shared was good. Even if we're friends, I'm not going to trust you after you do something to lose my trust. Right? That's certainly a negative consequence.
Exactly.
I think if I was understanding your objection earlier, you can tell me if I am or not, when you were saying that it wouldn't make sense to say that moral values are grounded in a personal being, because then it's just a matter of that person's opinion, right? Is that what you were saying? And that's, I think, a very legitimate point. The explanation that I think is the best explanation, I think, for morality isn't that love is good because there's this transcendent person out there who thinks love is good. I think what you're saying, what I'm hearing you say at least, is that love is good because of what it does to us, because of what it does to others.
And
the universe itself is the reference point for moral values, and when we look at the outcomes of love, we can clearly tell that love is good, and its positive outcomes are what define, I guess you would say they're the reason that love is good. That's why love is good.
Yes.
You know, that just kind of kicks the can down the road again, because then we're going to ask, well, why are things that lead to these particular outcomes objectively valuable, whereas things that lead to these particular outcomes are not, right? I think the best explanation, again, is going to be saying that in some way the ultimate reality is itself loving and just and merciful. That the reason why those things have objective value is because that's what the ultimate reality is.
I would agree with that. I would definitely agree with that, because when you take living beings or human beings out, the selfishness and the insecurities are taken out. The universe, whatever is left, what I called God or whatever, cannot be negative. It will be in harmony. When you take us out, everything is in harmony. Only when, let's say, living beings, as you said, with their subjectivities come into the picture, the negativity starts to exist. It comes into existence. If there are no living, let's say, beings trying to make decisions, when we make, that's what we said, when we make decisions, it's going to be subjective anyways. But I completely agree with what you said. If you take us out, the reference that is left, what we can, I would call it God or nature or whatever, correct? That becomes objectively what will be positive in every way. That's completely, I agree with that. We may call it love, I'll just call it, that's the rule of, that's just how, that's the universal, basically, causality or law, whatever, right? But I agree
you don't
with
think
that.
the universe is itself loving?
The motivation is not love, the effects may be same. It's in harmony, I would say. Because love is, as I think of love as a feeling or a subjective value that a being can experience. God is fair. He's loving in the sense that he does not hate you, so he's not hateful. He's forgiving, etc. But he's not loving in the sense that you can do whatever you want and
I completely agree. I'm curious, the way they were talking about God, it sounds more like the way that I'm talking about God, then at least what I understand Sikhism to teach, and I could be incorrect about this, my understanding was that God is more like a field, right? That he's not a personal being like you and me that has will and that can love and that can forgive and that can show mercy.
But the overall system that we are defining as God is fair, that we said, because everybody around me is a part of God. Everybody around you is a part of God when you think of it. When they notice us, when they experience us, when they immediately, whether they are consciously thinking of it or not, there is a perception being made and they know whether this person can be trusted with something or not. Correct? So there is a God who is very objective. Correct? At a micro scale, an individual can think of being subjective till it matters. When it starts mattering, they have to take an objective decision. Correct? Because by definition, because at that point it starts mattering. As we said, if you observe me doing something wrong, you'll not be able to. You will still call me your friend. You still want the best for me, as long as it's within some limit. But so in that sense, I do not think of God as a singular entity, that this is the beginning, this is the end, this is the definition. I do think of it as more of a countless. It's something that is everything, right?
And for what it's worth too, man, the God that we're talking about here isn't, I don't think we can prove just using our reasoning about morality that this God is the Christian God or the Muslim God or the Jewish God or the God of any particular religion. All that I'm saying here is that it seems, at least to me, like the best explanation for why love is objectively good is that the reference point for moral values, the objective standard for moral values, is itself loving.
Effect will be same.
Is itself merciful.
Motivation could be anything, but effect will be same. I agree with that.
Whereas and that would require, though, that standard to be a personal being of some kind. I guess one of the holdups that I have with
because a personal
with at least my understanding,
personal being cannot be infinitely loving.
Why
There's
not?
A difference.
Maybe not human, right? But we're talking about a transcendent person of some kind, right? A transcendent person whose very character is the standard for moral values. Right? Okay. When I say, why is love good, I point to that thing. I say, that's the reference point right there.
You define it as a reference.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
And if I'm understanding you correctly, I think one of the holdups that I would have is, or the questions I would have at least, is if we're going to say that certain outcomes in the universe that result from love, in contrast to certain outcomes that result from hatred, are the reason that love is objectively valuable, whereas hatred is not. I guess my question would be, what is the reference point for saying that things like love, qualities like love that lead to these outcomes are good, whereas qualities that lead to these outcomes are bad? What's the reference point for saying that? But you've been very gracious with your time, I appreciate it. I guess one final question I'd be interested in hearing your reaction to, if you're willing to share, is what, on your view, how do moral obligations exist? Because I think there's more to morality than just saying love is good and hatred is bad. I think that if someone is hit by a car here and they're bleeding out on the sidewalk and I see it and I'm walking by, I feel like I have a duty, an obligation to call 911 and get them help, right? I don't feel like that's just something that would be good to do. I feel like I have an obligation to do it. But in your view, if the universe is God in a sense, and God is in some kind of personal reality, who or what lays these obligations on us? Where do these duties come from? How would you answer? I'd be curious to know what your perspective is.
See, at the end of the day, we define things based on what's comfortable for us. So, as we said, people will be able to give reasons for whatever they choose to, just cherry pick reasons and say, I did it and this is the reason I did. So your moral compass is very consciously and deliberately designed by yourself, always, right? That said, there is definitely, as you said, a reference, which I call
objective reference point,
which I would say is based on its effect, let's say. But beyond that, where those moral, let's say, obligations are laid, those who do not believe in it, they are not laid for them. They are not even there.
You don't think so?
They only exist in the person's mind who thinks. For example, can you justify, let's say, to somebody like Hitler that he was morally wrong? Those obligations did not exist for him. That is why he did. He didn't set out to be wrong. In his mind, he was right.
For sure, yes. In his mind, he was right. And I think he's incorrect about that. I think he had an obligation to act justly and that he was prohibited from committing genocide.
But that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is in his mind, he was right.
In his mind,
he didn't set out to do wrong. In his mind, there was no obligation.
In his mind,
in his mind.
But do you think there still was an obligation?
Yeah.
I think there was still an obligation.
That's always there.
I agree.
That was there. But that's not what we are talking about. That's not what I'm conveying. What I'm conveying is the moral obligation by itself. I can choose whether I respect it or not, and I can end up trying to justify it and do my mess that I want. Obviously, the result will tell whether I was right or wrong. Right? But there is no way to agree that there is a moral obligation except when the result comes. Correct? I can deny it all I want, but the result will finally tell whether I was right or wrong. But other than that, I can justify standing here, I can do whatever I want, and I'll be able to find some things from the past and justify somebody did this to me. So this is, I don't care, this is how I am. So those moral obligations only for those who respect them, right? They are not for those who choose deliberately to not acknowledge or disrespect them, correct? But as you said, and I agree, they do objectively exist, and when the result comes, it just speaks for itself.
Oh, by the way, I agree with what you said about these moral obligations existing and some people flaunting them or disregarding them or not believing in them. Certainly many do. That doesn't change the fact that they still exist, right? Hitler had an obligation to act justly to all people.
And
he totally...
He didn't agree.
He absolutely did not.
But the result didn't care for that.
Yeah. I guess we'll probably have to wrap things up because you've been so gracious with your time, man. But I guess it would be a similar question for me then. It's like, well, why does certain kinds of actions leading to these outcomes mean I have an obligation to do this? And if certain actions lead to these outcomes, I'm prohibited from doing this. Where does this prohibition come from? Why do I have this obligation? Again, for me, it seems like the most natural explanation is that I have these obligations. I'm subject to these laws. Don't do this, because there is, again, some kind of person that is in authority requiring me to act certain ways and prohibiting me from acting others. But apart from the person, it seems hard.
Yeah, I agree with everything.
Except for the person part, right? Exactly. Well, you've been so gracious with your time, man. Is there anything else you would like to say while you're on camera? That was such a wonderful discussion. Oh, it's okay. So no final thoughts that you'd like to put out there?
I do not think we shared our opinion. We had a very constructive discussion.
It was wonderful, man. And I really appreciate you being open and honest and really explaining your viewpoint well. It was very interesting to hear. It was a wonderful conversation too. So
anything if I add, let's hope that every discussion that we have, something like this actually leads to some result. Somebody listens to it. It changes things for positive in some way or the other. Maybe in me, maybe in somebody else who listens.
I hope so, man.
There'll be real value.
Absolutely. And just to clarify, what different people believe, right?